Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, and every week we bring you the stories of people who are making the world better around them. As part of Rotary International, 1.2 million people in 36,000 clubs around the world, service above self is our motto. And in our club, the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, we do this locally, globally, and digitally. And we are proud that we get a chance to explore topics of innovation, education, and entrepreneurship. We got two of those three today in a way that I think is going to be quite intriguing for you. Our speaker, Steve Baughman Jensen, is a careful thinker with a heart for justice. I know this as he was one of my best friends from college, and we've known each other for 40 years. Some months ago, we were catching up, and he told me about his project, Healing White History. Race and racism are topics that are, for many, neither easy nor comfortable. What they definitely are is important. There are so many angles for the discussion and so many life experiences that allow one to avoid or force one to confront the associated issues. I believe Steve has taken an innovative approach to exploring these ideas and asked if he would be interested in sharing his work with us. Steve, it is such a pleasure to have you present to us. We hand the mic over to you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm just going to try and launch straight into my story. I thought I was honoring my family when I hung the poem by Charles Arden Russell, my great 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 grandfather, in my den. My mom found it in the family papers my granny, Happy Wiley, had preserved. Mom hired a calligrapher to copy it in elegant script, had it framed, and gave it to me as a gift. Years later, while researching our family history, I found two sentences buried on page 9 of Charlie's biography. He frequently took part of his fees for services in land, traded successfully in land, and invested his surplus earnings in negroes. Although he had few slaves working for him, he profited by hiring out the slaves to others who needed them. I read the sentences again and again. Invested his surplus earnings in negroes. I'd spent decades as an environmental lawyer, fighting corporations that treated regular folks as expendable. I convinced myself I was one of the good guys. And here was my ancestor treating human beings as investments. I walked to the den, stood in front of the framed poem, read his words. The line of right is the limit of a good man's action. What line of right was he thinking about when he invested in Black people? Years later, I decided that if Charlie's face was going to haunt me, I'd put it where everyone could see it. The photograph in my Substack avatar is him, not to honor him, but to face what he did. And I'm inviting you to face it with me. I hadn't just inherited keepsakes, I'd inherited a story. Stories decide who gets honored and who gets erased. My family's story honored Charlie. It erased the people he bought and sold. My family's story said Charlie was a pioneer, a founder, a music lover, and a devoted father. That story shrugged off what he did with his surplus earnings. Charles Arden Russell was smart, ambitious, and skilled. He helped expand the Texas frontier at the expense of native peoples, helped found Helena and Karnes County, practiced law, surveyed land, and built both furniture and homes. He was a devoted father who pushed for his children's education, rare on the frontier. As a lawyer myself, I cherished the idea that I had followed in Charlie's footsteps until I came to grips with the fact that he bought, sold, and leased human beings. Charlie grew up and was educated in New York, which had abolished slavery in 1827 when he was just 5 years old. By the time he had arrived in Texas at age 23, he'd been exposed his entire life to the notion that slavery was wrong and should be illegal. But Charlie chose to settle his young family in the slave state of Texas anyway. And here you can see the US Census slave schedules for 1850, when Charlie was still in his 20s, and 1860, Those schedules don't even list the enslaved people's names, only their age, their gender, and their race, black or mulatto, code for someone born from a rape. Charlie was not only an enslaver and trader, he also helped lead the Knights of the Golden Circle, a secret paramilitary organization devoted to preserving and expanding slavery. As chair of the KGC's military committee, Charlie designed a quote, home police to suppress servile insurrection. In May 1861, just after Texas had entered the Civil War, a group of the Knights of the Golden Circle in San Antonio burned down the Alamo Express newspaper building because the paper's editor and publisher had mocked the Knights and expressed pro-union, anti-secession sentiment. That newspaper editor fled to Mexico on threat of lynching. At the time, my ancestor was the adjutant general of the Knights of the Golden Circle, the head of their paramilitary operations. It's almost certain that he played a part in burning down that newspaper and chasing its publisher out of the country. In Texas and elsewhere, early organized policing grew from slave patrol systems, and Charlie's home police sat in that lineage. When I connect those dots forward, the image that haunts me is of my great 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 grandfather in modern gear enforcing the same logic with his knee on the neck of a black man. Control first, humanity last. Laws and institutions don't appear from nowhere. They're built from the foundation of a story. Talking to you in 2025, police violence against Black people remains an American epidemic. The core concept of Charlie's home police, treating Black bodies as threats to control, echoes in every viral video, every hashtag, every family's grief. My maternal grandmother, Happy Wiley, loved family history. Our family is privileged to have so much preserved: biographies, letters, journals, artifacts, photos, Charlie's included. His son Lyman, the biographer, was a devoted genealogist who traced lines of our family back centuries, and later generations of our family just added more. Granny herself spent hundreds of hours sifting and arranging, and late in her life, she made scrapbooks for each of her children, including my mom, Nancy. My family has celebrated Charles Arden Russell's legacy by preserving his name. We've honored him by keeping his name alive, 5 generations of Russells, first names and middle names. By long tradition, my family has cherished and honored Charles Arden Russell, either consciously or not. And I've learned that love and harm can travel in the same family heirlooms. In 2016, I retired from my law practice and I started writing about my grandmother, Happy, the keeper of our family history. I thought I was writing a loving tribute. Then in 2018, a friend invited me to join a racial equity task force at my church. And for the first time in my life, I learned how racist systems actually worked and how I had benefited from them. And when I looked back at Happy's scrapbooks, I did so with different eyes. The ancestors she celebrated, colonizers, enslavers. One was a slave trader. I wanted to look away, make excuses, to say that was just how things were. But I couldn't. In 2019, my son Ben married Faith, who is Black. Now I have 3 Black grandchildren. This history is not back then. It's sitting at my dinner table. In early 2025, I attended a retreat in Washington State. During a meditation by a river, I had what I can only describe as a mystical encounter with the earth itself. I was in the middle of this peaceful meditation, and a sudden moment of shame overcame me about the harm that I and we have done to the earth. Plunder and ravage, pollute, consume, and discard. Repeat. But just as quickly as this shame came upon me, I felt a warmth envelop me from below. That presence told me I've got this, and I've got you. That weekend, something opened up in me. The next week, I started writing a book. The words just poured through me. I'm calling the book Healing White History: Courageous Conversations with My Ancestors, because I spent decades ignorant of how my family fit into slavery, genocide against Native people, and Jim Crow. I'm reckoning with that truth and asking what repair looks like now. Each week, my Substack contains either excerpts from the book or related content. In the series on the Substack, I hold conversations with my ancestors. Charlie goes first. I confront my ancestors because stories build identities and drive systems, and my family's story helped build systems that still harm people today. And in the book, I tell the truth about my ancestors with receipts. The conversations demonstrate how imagination can make these hard truths more personal and therefore more real. At the same time, these visits with dead family members offer healing. They help me recognize the spots in my own thoughts and behavior where I've inherited not just genetics, but also a toxic story. They help me metabolize grief and shame into responsibility. This is not just about feeling better, it's about repair. 2 months after starting the first draft of my book manuscript, I'm 45,000 words in. I realized that I was following the truth, racial healing, and transformation framework. Tell the truth, heal what the story broke, transform and repair what the story built. I'm still learning. The framework helps, but the writing and the accountability it demands helps keep me honest.
Steve, thank you. Before we jump into the Q&A, I'd like to introduce the group that we've got on the recording from our membership. Matter of fact, everybody is a member. That's a bit unusual for us, but all good. So when I call your name, wave at the camera. I'll start from as far east as I can go with the group. Cecilia in Italy, good to see you. Steve in England, good to see you as well. From Arizona, we've got Dave. From here in the Bay Area, we've got Susan and me. Ding. And up in Oregon, I've got Heather, longtime friend of the club and honorary member as well. So, Steve, we're going to jump in, and I want to start with a question from one of our group about what it means to understand the connection with these in very practical terms. So Susan writes, I too love family history, and my aunt wrote a book tracing back several generations. That book now lodges with the Mormon Repository in Salt Lake City. Quite a few of my ancestors, all from Carolina through Texas, owned slaves. Since she died, I've been trying to get her only living direct descendant, her daughter, to release the book. She is worried, though, that she will expose herself and her kids to lawsuits for reparations. Do you have any similar worries, or do you know something I can tell Rhonda to relieve her fears and get her to share the 1960s research and pictures in her mother's book?
Okay. Well, Susan, thank you so much for that awesome sharing and question. So, as a lawyer, I can feel pretty confident. I'm not going to pretend I'm your lawyer giving you legal advice, but I feel pretty confident that there's no legal right of reparations that anyone holds, and that may not be a good thing, but I believe that it is the law. And so, I and from a individual speaking more in my authorial with my author's hat on as opposed to my lawyer's hat on at the moment, I think that we should not have guilt individually as white people about what our ancestors did decades or centuries ago. We didn't do that. We had no control, zero control over it. Why should we be guilty about it? Responsibility for transformation and reparations, though, is a different matter. And my thesis, or one of my theses, is that we inherit not just DNA from our ancestors, but we inherit their stories. They are part of who we are. They are part of our identities. Sometimes we consciously understand that. More often, I think we don't realize that it's happened. And comes both culturally and through our individual family and ancestors that we get these stories. And, the story, race itself is a false story. White superiority, white supremacy is a false and toxic story. Those stories have enormous power. They've done amazing amounts of harm. And I believe it's our responsibility as white folks uh, to repair that harm and to repair the systems that make that uh, harm ongoing. So that's my thesis.
Well, one of the things about how you seek to heal that history has to do with this approach you've taken in your writing, which I think is it fascinates me with each piece of it that I read. So we talk about the idea of confronting your ancestors, but I'd like you to actually explain in a little more detail what that looks like. You've got multiple ancestors in your book with whom you are having conversations. There is a vaguely science fiction from the time travel point of view kind of piece to this that is absolutely background, but creates the conditions where you can have a conversation about something that is going to be seen very differently in two different times, which is really interesting, right? Talk to us a little bit about that thinking about how you approach that, how you think about working to persuade your ancestors of points X, Y, or Z, and how you think about what you learn from them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it all started with, research into who they were. And, like as I said in the presentation, our family has a very like treasure trove of genealogical and biographical narrative information about a lot of our ancestors that most folks don't have. But I dug past even that treasure trove to learn about, when I picked out an ancestor that I thought I might want to focus on. Um, I tried to learn not only about them individually, I tried to learn whatever I could about them individually. If we had it, I'd read biographies, I'd read correspondence, I'd read journals if we had that stuff available. But I also did research into their time and place and the culture and what they knew and understood about native folks, indigenous folks, about enslaved people or people, non-white people, when and where we were talking about, and how they understood that, what stories were likely to be feeding their understanding of racial hierarchy and race, and most importantly, what did they believe? What was their value system? What was driving them? If they were religious, I wanted to know, okay, how did that play out? What kind of religion were they following, and how important was it in their daily life, etc. And what were the stories within that religious tradition, whatever it was, that were driving their ethics? And then I would take all that if I felt like I got to know them, and at that point I'd spent a lot of time with them, and if I felt comfortable that, yeah, I've got a sense of who this person probably was, then I would start drafting questions that I could ask them. And obviously I'm asking them from my perspective here in the here and now, the 21st century, and everything that's happened in all of my hindsight of centuries. Um, and but if I went back and talked to them while they were alive in their own time and their own place, what would that be like? And what could I ask them? And then I just started writing those conversations. And I also learned a lot about, before I started writing, I tried to learn a lot about sort of the daily details of their life. What kind of home would they live in? What kind of technology, what would they eat, what kind of stove or fire or whatever uh, source of heat, what would be available to them, what would it be like? And so I wrote all that, and then I started asking them the questions, and I honestly for some of them, I knew some of the things that they would say beforehand, but the honest truth was that for a lot of what the conversation happened in the conversation, I didn't know what was going to come out of their mouth and didn't know exactly what I was going to say in response either. So it ended up being a very intense emotional experience for me, even though it's coming out of my head, my imagination. It was transformative, but it made them more real. And that was the real purpose for it, is to make it more real for me as the writer and for the reader, to make it that when we encounter people as characters, as real, fully formed characters, then that's more significant than just writing on the page, my ancestor was a slave trader.
Well, that gets you to character over caricature, right? There's so much about the writing that I think will intrigue people. You have an ancestor who was a preacher in Massachusetts. Do you remember that correctly?
Yes, that's right.
That's one of my favorite pieces of the book.
Thank you, Rushton. Thank you so much, Steve, for sharing your story. Two questions. Number one, speaking of your family, how has your current living family reacting to this, and how do they feel about this story becoming public? And number two, I'm really impressed, especially in this era of removing anything DEI. What church are you a member of that has a racial justice task force?
Thank you. I'll answer the second question first. I am a member of First Unitarian Church of Dallas. So it's a Unitarian Universalist church in Dallas. And very proud and of all the work that we do on lots of justice issues. Our faith and philosophy is very geared toward justice making in the here and now. And then my family. So yeah, I think maybe probably my most courageous conversation of all was sharing all of this with my family. My maternal side of my family is very um, politically diverse, and we've got some very conservative folks that are my aunts and uncles and cousins. Not all of them, but many of them are pretty politically conservative, and race is a very toxic conversation piece for a lot of families, I think, today, when you've got diverse politics. And so I shared with them the manuscript. I asked them to read it, and then I gave them about 6 weeks, and I said, I'm gonna, setting a Zoom time. We're kind of all over the country, and I'm setting a Zoom meeting for this time, and I hope all of you can make it, and I hope you'll have a chance to have read in advance. But I want to get your reactions. And then eventually I shared with them that I wanted to know if they wanted to move forward with me on working on reparations together. And it's been a mixed bag, not uh, totally unsurprisingly, I think, but everybody was very kind to me and very supportive of me, and, you know, offered lots of compliments about the book. Not everybody read it, of course, but those who did, regardless of politics, were very supportive of my efforts. Some of them, reacted with what we would call, or what Robin DiAngelo called, white fragility. They were hurt that I, in particular, thought that they were racist. Of course, I asked if they felt singled out, and it's like, no. I mean, I understood you to be saying we're all racist, and so we talked through that, and there were real hurt feelings, but they were courageous to share that and be candid about it, which I felt good about, that we got all that out in the open, and I feel like that's a healing process in and of itself. Um, and at least a handful of us are going to be moving forward together on continuing the reparations process, and not everybody will, but I certainly didn't expect that.
I'm going to wind us down for the half-hour recording with a couple of thoughts that come from reading your writing specifically, and also from watching your YouTube channel, which you started as another way of exploring these ideas. One is that You make very specific that you are doing this from the standpoint of your own experience, that you are not seeking to write from the perspective of people from whom you can't, right? Like you just you have your ability to explore the history and explore these ideas, and it leads you where your heart leads you. But you wanted to make sure that you were specific about that, and so I'll let you kind of explore that in more detail. The other piece is this. One thing that came out in the Substack, but not in the book, is a note that essentially asked, how can I don't remember where the guy is from, but he essentially read your stuff and said, I want to be able to do these kinds of things too. How do I start? So with those two ideas in whatever order kind of worked for you, let's finish up the recording, and then, as we always do, we'll keep talking to you, because that's the privilege we have in the Rotary Club of Silicon Valley of continuing to talk to fascinating people after we finish the recording. So, Steve, hand it back to you.
Yeah, yeah. So thanks for both of those great questions. First on, I can only speak from my perspective. So my perspective obviously is as of a white male, and I fit, all the identity boxes that are privileged in our culture. Pretty much I check. I'm wealthy, I'm white, I'm a male, straight, I'm cisgendered, I'm able-bodied, all of these things. I have all of these privileges, and everything I write is from that perspective. And it becomes particularly sensitive, I guess, that I don't want to try and I I I want very much for myself and other white folks to spend more time thinking about and imagining what life is like as a person of color, particularly as a Black or indigenous person affected by colonization or slavery, and the fallout and the stories, that institutions that persist with those stories, built on the foundations of those stories today. Um, but all people of color suffer from white supremacy in the same story, and I very much want this work to lead me and hopefully other white folks into being able to spend more emotional effort and imagination into what it's like to go through life as a person of color. Having said that, when I'm writing, I don't feel competent to uh, fill in those details. And so, the stories from that perspective, it's a white-centered perspective. And, I've got, I'm about to share, for any person of color that happens to read this work, or you know uh, view anything on the YouTube or whatever, I am very thankful for their patience in a white person centering themselves in a story about race, because that is fatiguing at the very least, I think, for a lot of people of color, and it can often be feel hurtful or traumatic at times. And we have this cultural, we're conditioned as white folks to have a sort of a white savior complex, where we're ready to save the world, and almost always goes wrong, and causes harm. So I'm hopeful that I'm entering this with a humble perspective, even though I am centering myself in the process. But it's hard, and I need a check, and invite anyone, regardless of how you racially identify, to let me know when I've screwed that up, because I will. But so your second question, Rushton, remind me what that was.
That's the one from the Substack reader who said, I want to be able to do this with my own ancestors.
Thank you. Yeah, so that was really fun, and another very old friend of mine that shared that question. And I think that any white person can do this. It's going to be very different process for everybody. But I've I've created actually a step-by-step guide that I haven't yet put on the Substack, but in coming weeks, I will be sharing that framework, which includes both a sort of the broad truth, racial healing, and transformation framework, which I, of course, did not develop. That was developed by the Kellogg Foundation about 15 years ago. but also a step-by-step framework and process for what I have done and how anybody else who's white can do it with their own family tree. And I, it'll feel differently for everybody, but I think it can be transformative for a whole lot of folks.
Well, tip of the iceberg on a really amazing story, and I'm excited for us to explore it again just in the next few minutes. But for all of you who have taken time to watch this recording or any of the recordings from the Rotary E Club of Silicon Valley, the idea that stories can be powerful is one that we believe is important for the here and now in all manner of ways. Just to listen to the news is to focus on the news that the media believes sells, right? And so the good stories of people out there doing really interesting work, whether it's with the environment or helping alleviate poverty or eliminating disease, the many causes that are a part of what Rotary stands for. We believe these stories are stories to share and inspire, and we hope that you will do so. And you all can always reach out to us. We're the only Rotary Club in the world that you can find via rotary.cool in your browser. We're really proud of that. As we always like to do, we hand it back to the speaker for the final word. Steve, what would you like people who are finishing this podcast or this video to have clearly on their minds?
Okay, thank you, Rush. And I'm going to share my screen again. So before I go, I want to share one of the core quotes that inspired me to do this project. It's by Brian Stevenson, a Black civil rights lawyer, activist. He's the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. He says, "We need to reckon with our history of racial injustice. The great evil of American slavery wasn't the involuntary servitude. It was the fiction that Black people aren't as good as white people." And I want to ask if my project resonates for you, and if you want to help overwrite the false stories of race and white superiority, then there are three things I'd ask you to do. First, please subscribe to my Substack. The link is on the screen and in the comments. Read my posts and engage with the community there. Quite a few folks have shared powerful stories about their own ancestors. Leave your own comments. Second, please share that link with anyone you think might also connect with this work. Building the Substack community will help me find a publisher for my book manuscript. And third, if you're white, take the plunge yourself. Within the next few weeks, as I just mentioned, I'll be posting a step-by-step guide for confronting your own ancestors. And while I can't promise what that experience will be like for you, for me, this process led to powerful healing, transformation, and ultimately will lead to repair. I hope and believe it can do the same for at least some of you. And again, I want to echo for any Black, Indigenous, or other people of color who are watching this, thank you. Thank you for your patience with yet another white person centering himself while talking about race. If my work has caused any harm or trauma for any of you, regardless of how you racially identify, I'm really very, very sorry about that. I hope and believe that this work will, on the whole, be far more healing than it is hurtful. Peace.
Thank you, Steve. For all of you watching, between the time that we record this and post it is a period of several months. So I'm sure you can find all of these resources on the Substack, and you can also find the YouTube channel link on the page where you found the recording. Have a wonderful week. We will see you soon.